Alright, so last part that we're going to be talking about in the cardiovascular system is going to also incorporate the use of blood. So chapter 14 is going to be taking a look at how blood is going to be entailed within the cardiovascular system and the usefulness behind it. As we learned back in the tissue unit, which is probably the second unit we covered in here, we talked about blood being a specialized type of connective tissue, along with that of the cartilage and bone. But blood itself is another specialized type of connective tissue that has a particular function. Now, there are certain cells within them. You have a red blood cell. A red blood cell's scientific term is an erythrocyte. So we're going to abbreviate it in the notes as RBC. A white blood cell, the scientific term is a leukocyte, which we're going to abbreviate WBC, and platelets, which are fragments of cells. The other part that you might find within blood are going to be different chemicals, proteins. Now, an example of a protein that you might find is an immunoglobulin, or otherwise known as an antibody, something that our bodies create, in particular some of our white blood cells create, in order for us to be able to have an immune response. And then we have the fluid-filled portion. The majority of that, about 95% of the plasma itself, is actually made up of water. But there's other chemicals, everything from carbohydrates, lipids, and some more proteins are going to be within that fluid portion. Blood transports substance throughout the body. It's one of the primary things is that it does help maintain homeostasis. If you think about a stable internal environment, it doesn't always have to be about shivering and sweating, but it could also be about removing of toxins. So for an example, if I'm walking from one side of a room to another, I'm going to be building up lactic acid within inside my muscles. So the only way I can remove that lactic acid is the use of water. Drinking that water, filtering it all the way through my digestive tract, and once it's absorbed through the large intestine, then going to be pushed into the blood where it's then going to help filter through the kidneys, and then I can actually remove that toxin. So if I look at the blood itself, blood and the blood cells include red, white, and platelets. There's also this other portion that's going to be within blood. It's called the plasma. It's a transparent yellowish liquid that's not only going to contain, again, the majority of water, but you're going to have a whole bunch of other things. Amino acids, which are the building blocks of proteins. Carbohydrates, which are going to give nourishment to all the different cells. Same with lipids. You will have some vitamins and minerals that we might also find within there. You're going to see some hormones. These are other different types of protein, specialized proteins. Electrolytes, salts, so for example, sodium and potassium. Immunity molecules, so these are antibodies or immunoglobulins. So these are things that are going to be created by a white blood cell that's going to help fight it off infections. They're actually, we're going to see later on in the blood typing, is going to be utilized to fight off infections based upon a particular antigen. And finally, it's going to be able to carry cellular waste. So things that the cell wants to get rid of, it dumps it off in the blood, and eventually we can get rid of it. For example, that lactic acid I was just mentioning, or even gas like carbon dioxide we may want to get rid of. All in all, that's what's going to help inside of it. We have a blood pH about 7.4. So you see this, it's neutral but slightly basic in the 0.4. Now, if we start working our way down, we talked about the Atkins diet, how that starts to lower it by the buildup of ketone bodies and undergoing ketone acidosis, which eventually lowers that blood pH, which could be a very, very detrimental thing. Alright, as we scroll down a little bit more, we're going to just take a look at the red blood cells itself. The RBCs, as we stated before, is the scientific term is an erythrocyte biconcave disc, and that they are going to lose their nucleus at maturity. So as they're developing, they still have their nucleus, but as they are a mature red blood cell, their only job is to carry that oxygen. They actually lose their nucleus. So in terms of a CSI, when they're testing for blood, they don't actually look at your red blood cells. They're actually looking for the other type of blood cell, that being your white blood cell, that does contain the nucleus. Alright, when oxygen combines with hemoglobin, bright red oxyhemoglobin results. So if we're taking a look at our blood, now your blood is never blue, and you see that in some of our artistic ability. It's a very dull red or burgundy in color. That is our deoxygenated blood. So if you've ever donated blood or had your blood drawn before, you've taken a look at that. It doesn't look blue. Alright, it's a dark burgundy color, but once it does hit oxygen, it becomes this oxyhemoglobin result. It is extremely bright red, a very, very bright red. That's our oxygenated blood. In this case, you got to be very careful, because if you do see this bright red blood happening, you know it's coming from an artery, or at least typically coming from an artery. The only one exception being that it's going to be in the pulmonary vein, that it's going to be under some pressure, and so stoppage of bleeding is extremely important with that in comparison to that of a vein, which does not have the exact pressure that the other ones do. All of the veins except for this one, the pulmonary artery, are going to carry all veins are going to be carrying deoxygenated blood. Okay, and there's only one artery that will be doing the same thing that carries deoxygenated blood. That's being the pulmonary artery. All right. Approximate life of a red blood cell is around 120 days. Now these guys are always going to be broken down and disposed of by the liver and spleen. The main job is to filter out through red blood cells, damaged red blood cells. They're going to be transporting carbon dioxide and oxygen. And the number of red blood cells is a measure of how much oxygen you can hold. Now, if some of you guys have had class that talked about blood doping, the Lance Armstrong thing, you could talk about if you're able to get more blood in your body, the more blood that you have, in particular red blood cells that you have, the more ability that oxygen can bind to it, so you can carry more oxygen, so that means you'd be less tired. Individuals that are anemic or anemia suffer from the ability to not carry oxygen because there's not enough hemoglobin, or in particular an iron substance within their blood cell that holds onto oxygen. So if that hemoglobin is not there or is not high enough, the efficiency and or affinity of oxygen to bind to the red blood cell is lacking. Here's just a quick illustration that you take a look at a red blood cell. A normal red blood cell is our biconcave disc shape, okay, really small. And we'll take a look at our white blood cells now. White blood cells, known as leukocytes. When I have way too many of these growing out of control, you guys have probably all heard of the term leukemia before. It's a cancer of the white blood cells. Kind of a scary thing because we know white blood cells' job is to help fight infections. So if we're having leukemia, we got all these white blood cells going around, they're going to try to pick a fight and find things to work on, find things to go up against. So not a great thing to have too many of them. And in particular, there's less than 1% of all of our blood cells is actually, so I think it's 0.1% of all of our blood cells are white blood cells. So we don't want very many of them. So there are really 5 different types of those white blood cells, and we'll see here in just a second. You don't really need to know the types for this unit. All I just need you to know is that white blood cells, their job is to help protect the body against disease. In looking at this slide here, all this is talking about is showing you how we go from a particular stem cell. Now this is a hematopoietic stem cell. If you can see this way up here, it's a hematopoietic stem cell, which means it's a cell that can be any of the different types of blood cells, from red blood cells to platelets to white blood cells. So I'm scrolling down a little bit further. Here we have what's called a proerythroblast, a before red builder. So this is a red blood cell, a very immature red blood cell, and as it grows, here's still the nucleus is disappearing, and finally we have an erythrocyte that has no longer containing a nucleus. It is at full-on maturity and lasts approximately 120 days. As we look at this guy, megakaryocyte, you can think of it as in terms of a big plate. Now if I'm going to throw that big plate up against a wall, we end up getting all these different shards of the plate. All right, now we call it platelets. And then you get into your other different types of white blood cells. They go from the neutrophils, basophils, the xenophils, the macrophages, and the different types of plasma cells, which could be a type of B lymphocyte or a T lymphocyte. Their jobs, again, all of them are under the primary immune response. We can go and talk into those specialties, but for what we need to know right now, just knowing that it's under an immune response. Platelets, as I just mentioned before, is just blood. Platelets are fragments of cells. They help repair damaged blood vessels by adhering to broken edges. This is a very great thing that can happen. It could save your life, but it also can kill you too, in terms of myocardial infarction, where we have our red blood cell hitting up against a cholesterol piece, tears that cholesterol off the arterial wall in the coronary artery. We'd think that'd be a great thing, but our body recognizes that as tissue damage, and then clotting starts to occur. And if we clot that area to occur, all the heart muscle behind it won't get oxygen, which means it cannot contract. And if it's not able to contract, then that means that that can't pump blood throughout the whole body, which means the rest of the body suffers. Same type of thing happens in the brain. You imagine a stroke within the brain because you get a blood clot within there, and the brain operates everything else that you do. So if you have bad things that occur in some of the parts of the body that you need in order to survive, that could be some really bad things that occur. Alright, in this slide it just takes a quick look at the difference between blood, what's in it. We have 55% of it's plasma, 45% is actually the formed elements, so this is our blood cells. white, red, and platelets. Again, less than 1% of our blood cells, actually 0.1%, are from white blood cells. So we don't have a whole lot of them. Again, we don't want them to find a fight. In terms of the plasma, you've got a whole bunch of different things, the majority of it being water, 92% of it. We have different proteins, sugars, you have electrolytes, some different wastes we're going to pick up if we're getting like lactic acid. Some of the major gases, again, we're going to refer to as oxygen and carbon dioxide. Okay. All right. In this next section, we're going to take a look at how blood groups and transfusions occur. We'll wait here in just a second, and this will end up being part 2 of the blood video.